All right. Well, thank you for the songs this evening. We're going to continue our Bible study in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 6. So, chapter 5, which the last time we looked at, we finished chapter 5. And chapter 5 contrasted the way of the strange woman. I mean, going that way, pursuing um, that sort of life, with contrasted that with faithful marriage. And the way of faithful marriage is the way of blessing. It's the way of building a family in this life. But it is much more of a long term vision in Proverbs. The strange woman is temporary and immediate. The way of the strange woman, though, is the way of destruction and ruin and regret. So there are certainly, when we're thinking about that chapter, and there are certainly some particular dangers to young people. And that would be what you might call the mindset of fun now and faithful later. Let me just have fun, just do whatever, and later I can get more serious about life, and later I can, clean up my act or whatever that it is. And it's easy when you're young. It's very very tempting to embrace that mindset that I can just have fun. There's no need to worry about later and until it's later. Um, what's the problem with that sort of mentality? What's the problem with fun now and maybe faithfulness later? Well, the problem with fun now, first and foremost, is that it's sin. And we're talking here particularly in the sexual sins and such that Solomon warned about in Proverbs chapter 5. It is sin. So fun now, well, yes, there may be a degree of enjoyment about it and about a whole lot of other things that the Bible just plainly tells us not to do, that these things are sin. So the first problem with that mentality is the fact that it is just sin. The second problem is that you're gambling, and you're gambling at some pretty long odds. You are sort of rolling the dice, as it were, that I can go down this road of fun and excitement now and worry about other things later, that I can just go down this, that Proverbs has plainly told us repeatedly at this point. It's the road of destruction. It's a road that ends in hell, is what we've been told about it. And you're taking a long gamble that I can just go down this road and then leave it whenever I want to. I can just get off the train whenever I want to and not have any repercussions, and then do things the right way and do things in the good way. So that's another problem, that like you're not looking very far ahead. You're taking quite a risk. Now, having said that, yes, God is gracious and God is merciful. And that's not to say that there's not forgiveness with repentance and there's not restoration and things that can happen. But again, you're playing at some pretty long odds. And the third problem, I would say, with the idea of, don't worry about it, just have fun now and then worry about getting serious about life later, is that fun now is actually ruining your hope for life later. Um, chapter 5 was a very, very good warning. And again, these are particular problems for young people. It's just it, when you're young, it's just hard to imagine getting old. It's hard to imagine being old. And then you get old and you feel like, well, I'm just a young person trapped in an old person's body. But it's hard to imagine getting old. And that seems like that is so far away that surely I can just play around, have fun now, not worry too much, not be too serious about things. And then later I'll have plenty of time to do things that are right. So that is a particular temptation for young people. And it's a very strong one. Again, because it's just so hard to envision yourself getting and being old. Well, chapter 6 now opens with another address and changes topics. Solomon's not done with this topic. We're going to get back to it, but for now, he changes topics, and um, the address warns in particular of three traps to avoid and of the seven abominations that really describe the sort of wicked man that Proverbs is telling you and wisdom is telling you to avoid. So I'm going to try to get through 19 verses because it was kind of hard to break it in any other way, because you get to verse 20 and then you're changing topics again. And so I'm going to try. If not, then we'll get them, but I'm going to try to get through 19 verses. So here at the beginning of chapter 6, you've got basically two main parts. The verses 1 to 15 give you the three traps, and then verses 16 to 19 are the ones that give you the seven abominations. So we'll start the first 5 verses. This is our first trap, and we could generally describe it as the trap of getting entangled in hasty obligations. So, verse 1, my son, if thou be surety for thy friend, if thou hast stricken thy hand with a stranger, thou art snared with the words of thy mouth, thou art taken with the words of thy mouth. Do this now, my son, and deliver thyself. When thou art come into the hand of thy friend, go humble thyself and make sure thy friend. Give not sleep to thine eyes, nor slumber to thine eyelids. Deliver thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. All right, so Solomon begins this new address here, and you can see this, my son, that typically starts these addresses. And so, again, the issue here is the issue of what we could say of hastiness, of being quick to become entangled, to become obligated. Now, specifically, when he talks about being surety, he's talking about securing a debt. It's sort of like today what we think of as a cosigner. So if you cosign on a debt, and the person that took on the debt, if they default and can't pay or whatever, well, then who has to pay? Well, you do, because you co-signed the debt. All right, so that it's that sort of thing when he talks about being surety. Now, obviously, we can make application from these verses for a lot more, and if you want to just make it a little more general, again, it's the idea of becoming obligated. In other words, getting yourself entangled in something that is not easy to get out of, could sort of more generally fit the bill. So, striking hands, which is a phrase. Really, it's just a practice. It was a method of entering into a contract. So we don't really strike hands today, but you might sign, just like with cosigner. You might sign something. So it's just a method of entering into a contract. So what these two things do, though, is that they also give us the idea of some legal obligation. So this is something that's binding. You've gotten yourself in the soup, as it were, for this. So now, the word for friend, we don't want to trip over that. It doesn't necessarily indicate closeness, in the sense of friend. It's sort of like neighbor. It's a little more general. It could be anyone. So the relation between the two is not what's important at all. That's not what Solomon's making a point about. Rather, it's unwisely getting yourself entangled in something that you can't um, get out of. So any situation where you're under that binding obligation, you sort of have voluntarily obligated yourself hastily. This, in other words, is not a wise decision. Um, and he says, if you've done this, you have become snared with the words of your mouth, and you're taken with the words of your mouth. Now, both of those terms obviously have to do with a trap and being caught in a trap, or sort of they obviously it's hunting imagery, someone that lays a trap for a bird or some small game animal to catch it. So in this case, though, notice that it's the words of thy mouth. So if you want to even generalize a little further, Solomon is warning against your mouth getting you in trouble, being too quick to speak and getting yourself in trouble. So this is a hasty action. It's without thought. It's a quick speaking. Now, right away, you know that when you read Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, you realize that wisdom is always looking ahead. It's always taking a long view. Wisdom is not just concerned about the immediate here and now. Wisdom is looking down the road, and that's what Solomon has been repeatedly trying to get his son and really young people to think about. That wisdom, looks way down the road. So again, it's the application or the particular. I guess we could say it's again sort of like the scenarios that we encountered in the earlier part. That it's not just limited to this scenario, but it does have broader application. But it gives us a very good illustration of what it is that he's talking about. And so, if this is the case, Solomon says in verse 3, "Do this now." And so he's emphasizing urgency, immediate type of action. If you have found yourself in this situation, he basically says, get out of it as soon as possible. Language we see there, deliver thyself, which really the word for deliver sounds, uh, um, a little innocuous, but it's actually the word that's used there means to like tear away, to rip away. It's the image of again of being ensnared, and he's going to have more to say with that image in a little bit. Now, to go humble yourself is an interesting choice of words. Has the idea of being trampled down, and really it gives us the picture. Humbling thyself, it might literally be like, go lay on the ground in front of this person. Go put yourself at their feet in the dirt in front of this person. The idea of trampling is being walked on. Make yourself a doormat, sort of, so to speak, or like a rug. So the point is, humble yourself to whatever extent is necessary, which is obviously a problem. It is hard for us to humble ourselves, to admit that we've done something wrong, to admit that we've been careless, to admit that we've been foolish, to even admit sometimes that the consequences of what we're suffering is due to our own actions or lack of action or negligence or whatever that the case may be. But he says to make sure, in reference to the friend, the neighbor. Again, the relationship is not really what's important. And that again gives us the idea of urgency, and it also there's some forcibleness to it. Now, Solomon here is not advising any kind of trickery or deceit. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying deliver yourself by any means possible, any means necessary. That's not what he's saying. But he is saying lower yourself however far is necessary, and pursue release from this, And of course, again, he doesn't mean by doing anything deceitful or anything like that. Certainly not by lying or doing anything. In fact, that would be go along with the humbling of oneself, because it's the idea really of acknowledgement, confession, owning what it is that you have done. So if there's any legitimate way of getting out of this, then that is what he says to do. He goes on to press the urgency by saying, not to sleep, not to slumber. Um, so it's a serious problem, and so the point is to take it seriously. Don't just look at it casually. Do everything that you can do in any honest way to get out of this, if at all possible, and humbling yourself however much needs be. Um, and then we get back to this hunting imagery and the trapped or the hunted animal, delivering thyself as a roe from the hand of the hunter, and as a bird from the hand of the fowler. So those are a couple of images. A roe, the roe that he's talking about would be something like a gazelle. Um, the exact animal, again, is not 100% certain about that. And a bird, or it could be any small animal that can be taken in a trap. But the point is that it's a comparison. All right. So what does an animal like this do when it is trapped? Well, they will basically exhaust themselves to get out of the trap. Sometimes they become entrapped, and they work so hard to get out, they actually die without getting out of the trap. So Solomon is saying, learn a lesson here. Deliver yourself like that. Look for every way possible to get out of such an unwise and dangerous and disastrous type of obligation if you have gotten into it. So the animal gives all their energy and all their attention and all their focus on getting out of that trap. And so that is what Solomon is urging, and that's why he uses this particularly poignant illustration. Now we get to the next trap, and we could just say broadly that this is the trap of laziness. Verses 6 to 11. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways, and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou arise out of thy sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that traveleth, and thy want as an armed man. So here, Solomon is warning against this trap of slothfulness. Again, we would just say laziness. Now, we have seen it warned against previously in some ways, like in delivering yourself and not sleeping and whatever. But he gives it more particular attention, and maybe he's even blunter here in this address. So the word for sluggard just means a sluggish or a lazy person. We don't really use that term that much anymore. But verses 6 to 8 in particular instruct the sluggard to look at the ant and to learn a lesson. So Solomon just used these animals, the bird, the roe. He just used these animals that have become hunted or entrapped, and how they will focus all of their energy on getting out of that trap. So use that as an illustration. Well, now he's using the ant. And so he wants the ant to be looked to as both an example and as a reproof. And we'll see both of those in this passage. So he considers a few characteristics of the ants, things such as diligence and persistent effort. Now, the point that Solomon is making here is obviously not to humanize ants, and people do that sometimes with animals, and they sort of give them human-like qualities and things when really we're just we're just talking about God-given instincts that they have. It's mostly instinctual behavior, and I know they can learn some things and be trained in some ways. But Solomon's not humanizing ants here, but the fact that they aren't humans is actually a reproof. In other words, they don't have the capacity for wisdom that a human being has. And so when they act more wisely than a human being does, then again, that is a very thorough rebuke. So the ant is certainly good for a rebuke. The ant is also good for instruction in wisdom, and that's why Solomon directs the attention there. And we could even say that as he wants urges to learn from the ant, one of the marks of wisdom is being able to learn from many different sources, being able to um, uh, maybe not sources maybe that don't typically think of, or maybe even some that are hostile. David learned wisdom from the cursing of Shimei. So you can learn wisdom in different ways and from different sources. Some of them quite unexpected or surprising. So learn from the ant. And what he says about the ant there in verse 7 is that the ant has no guide, no overseer, no ruler. Now, Solomon is not talking about or saying that ants, don't have a sort of cooperative effort. They do have a cooperative effort, but the individual ant is not driven by a supervisor or a taskmaster. In other words, he's saying that the ant is self-motivated. It doesn't need the overbearing presence of an overseer in order to work diligently. So it's easy sometimes, and I would say a particular temptation for young people, because young people, you have guides and overseers and rulers over you a lot. And whether it's a teacher at school, whether it's a coach in sports, whether it's whatever, you have guides and overseers. So here's a trap that's easy to fall into, is that you can overlook your own laziness because you're being driven constantly by others. So it's easy to think, well, I'm not lazy. I'm working myself to death here. But that's because you're being driven to it by others. So the real test that Solomon is pointing to, using the ant as the illustration, is are you persistently working without an overseer or a guide or a ruler? In other words, no one driving you to it. Are you able to put forth diligent effort in that way? So the ant doesn't have that oversight, and nevertheless, gathers food when it is time to gather food. And again, I know a lot of this is instinctual behavior, but it does provide a good example. And then we get, that's in verse 8. Then we get in verse number 9, verses 9 to 11, where Solomon sort of takes a little different track. He just a direct address. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou rise out of sleep? And so on. We read those verses earlier. So really what begins here at verse 9 and goes down through verse number 11 is really just a pressing application. So he has given this illustration, this example of the ants, and now he's just pressing this application home. So this is aggressive. It's very pointed to the lazy sleeper. The point he's making is how that they love sleep and they love rest and they love comfort. Now, there's obviously we cannot work endlessly without rest. We do need rest. Rest, in fact, we're told in the Bible that rest is a gift from God. But rest, just like all of God's other good gifts, can be abused. and it can be misused. And when it is a sort of a cover for laziness, then it is being sinfully abused. In Proverbs 26:14, Solomon uses an exam or an illustration of a lazy person that he's hinged to his bed. Like a door. It opens and closes and opens and closes, but the door don't actually go anywhere. It has a lot of motion, but it doesn't go anywhere because it's hinged. It's hinged to the jamb. And so all it can do is just turn. And so the lazy person, he says, it's like they're hinged to the bed, and all they can do is just turn over back and forth and turn over back and forth, but never rouse themselves up to do anything. So yes, there's always a time. There's a time for rest. There's a time for sleep. And there's also a time for work. And on there in Proverbs 26, I think down in verse 16, he also gives, essentially that the lazy person always seems to have a reason. There always seems to be a reason why they can't work or can't get started or whatever the case may be. But the point is that Solomon is making is that it's time to get up. It's time to get busy. So he gives the refrain there in verse number 10. It's almost like a little song, a little lullaby that the lazy person would lull themselves to sleep by. One of the things that he brings out in Ecclesiastes, as well as he does here in Proverbs, is that there is almost never going to be ideal conditions. You're almost never going to set about to do some kind of work that you just have all the time in the world. You have all of the resources at your disposal. You have all of the tools for best fitted for the job. All of these things. Rarely is that ever going to be the case. And the point that gets made is that if you're waiting for that, then you're never going to get anything done. You're never going to get started. So he speaks about there in verse 11, which he's giving a consequence. Here's what's going to happen. Poverty is going to come, and want and lack and need. So the meaning of these terms, the armed man, this is like a robber, just comes on suddenly. And that's sort of the way that it works. The realization just sort of all at once, how did I get in this situation? And so it does come, and it comes quickly. All right, so let's move along. The next one comes here, verses 12 to 15. And I would say this trap could sort of generally be referred to as unprofitable, let's say, for friendships, partnerships, and it kind of goes along with getting entangled, but certainly a different look at that. So verses 12 to 15, a naughty person, a wicked man, walketh with a froward mouth. He winketh with his eyes. He speaketh with his feet. He teacheth with his fingers. Frowardness is in his heart. He deviseth mischief continually. He soweth discord. Therefore shall his calamity come suddenly. Suddenly shall he be broken without remedy. So a naughty person, a wicked man, this is describing sort of a worthless person. Naughty person literally would be a man of Belial, which came to be a reference to Satan, actually, and someone manifesting, wickedness of heart, destructiveness, worthlessness, whatever would be called a son of Satan, essentially, if they had such qualities. And the word for wicked is sort of like the idea of trouble or trouble making. Nothing good. Froward. We see this come up a couple of times here. It's perverse. It's crooked. It's bent away from wisdom. It's been away from God's word. So he's not this sort of person is not proposing anything good. It's not anything of any value. It's trouble and it's vanity. In other words, it could probably be on a range from just outright sinfulness to just utter worthlessness, just a waste of time and energy. Now, it gives us this verse in verse 13 talks about winking and speaking and teaching and all this sort of thing. And it's sort of odd when you look at the way this is phrased, but really what it's pointing to is just different physical gestures employed. And we're not entirely certain what exactly each of these might look like for certain, what he's saying, but the fact that they're used to deceive is really what's important. He uses means. He uses things at his disposal. We could say that these gestures are a part of his salesmanship. He can manipulate through perhaps feigning being upset or even pretending to get emotional and all of these sort of things. So he has a way sort of trying to allure people. He has a froward mouth that we just saw there in the previous verse, and he devises mischief continually in his heart or in his mind. So we're getting this picture of this wicked man who basically is constantly seeking to lead others astray. And he's doing so to take advantage of one way or another. Like he's getting something for it. And the word for mischief that's used there, we could think of it as evil, adversity to others. In other words, he's continually plotting, continually contriving ways of taking advantage of someone else or getting revenge or whatever that it might be. Discord has to do with strife, contention, and it says that he sows, and sowing, of course, referring to the scattering of seed. So, if you're sowing seed in the ground, you would have maybe a sack or something that's full of seed, and you're just grabbing it and you're just broadcasting it, liberally everywhere. And so that's how this man does discord or sows discord. In other words, he would rather people be at odds with one another than be in harmony with one another. And there are, I mean, if you've not encountered someone like that, you probably will at some point. It's almost like they just can't have any personal happiness if other people are not fighting. They've just got to get something stirred up and to keep something stirred up and then step back. And I don't know if it's entertainment. I mean, I really don't know. But there are some people that they just can't seem to do without people being upset with each other and fighting and falling out over something. And of course, they usually take advantage of those situations to advance themselves in some way. And it says that it gives this this consequence, this calamity, which has to do with destruction, ruin, being broken, being crushed like a clay pot being smashed to pieces. And it says suddenly broken. And when it says suddenly, it refers to a judgment. It's something that just comes quickly in a moment of time. And the idea of suddenness of it is they're surprised by it. And so if you've ever known the type of person that's always going around, trying to stir things up, and then sometimes in life they get caught And when they get caught and called out, they're surprised. They're shocked. Why are people upset with me? They don't understand it. And the idea of this calamity and being without remedy, it's irreparable. In other words, they're heading toward an end that there's no healing. There's no they're heading toward eternal punishment, going about this way. And then that gets explained in verses 16 to 19 with the abominations or the seven deadly sins. Sometimes people refer to them. These six things does the Lord hate. Yea, seven are an abomination unto him: a proud look, a lying tongue, and hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that deviseth wicked imaginations, feet that be swift in running to mischief, a false witness that speaketh lies, and he that soweth discord among brethren. So really, when you look at this in context, you see that Solomon is roundly condemning the sort of man he has just described that can so easily ensnare and entrap a young person. So he says that the Lord Yahweh hates these things. Abomination is the idea of being abhorrent, of being detestable. And so these are expressions of sins that God is completely separate from. These are not the way of wisdom. These are not the way of righteousness. These are not the way of God. They have no place in all of that. And those who walk in these things without repentance will meet God's judgment against him, just like he said in previous there in verse 15. So we look at them, a proud look. It speaks of having high thoughts of yourself, arrogance, pride, thoughts of superiority, being above others. And usually along with that is the idea of being above any sort of law or rule or governorship or whatever. Obviously, it's completely antithetical to wisdom, the sort of humility that is born of wisdom. God hates it. A lying tongue. Now that obviously deception or fraud, such speech that's used to cheat people, that's used to beguile and to manipulate people, and usually likewise to exonerate oneself. And the old term that I can remember hearing when I was growing up, they would talk about the person that was always an agitator and would come up smelling like a rose. And so that's this lying tongue. Hands that shed innocent blood. Now, obviously, the direct, literal, immediate reference to this would be murder. And obviously, that's a very serious sin. And there can be guilt in complicity to murder indirectly, as well as guilt in murder directly. Of course, we also remember in the Sermon on the Mount and the law of Christ how he spoke of lumping together with murder the idea of hating others without cause. A heart or a mind that devises wicked imaginations. So that means to plan evil schemes, which is what the wicked man does continually. Being swift in running to mischief. In other words, quickly, easily, very easily falling into it. It's just another mark of the evil man that we saw previously, that he is bent toward these things. A false witness that speaks lies. Now, false witness includes deception, obviously, but it is a little bit different from the lying tongue, because the false witness in particular is lying in order to condemn someone, in order to accuse someone. It's a false report that is given. And he that soweth discord among brethren, to sow discord, that he says is an abomination to the Lord. Now, discord, again, refers to strife or contention. That's, again, the idea of sowing, just broadcasting it liberally. Inflaming contentions, keeping contentions going, and all of that sort of thing. So, looking at this first address, it's easy for us to see very common temptations and pitfalls for young people. Now, again, these are addresses to young people. Solomon has given us in Proverbs. That doesn't mean old people are not and cannot be guilty of these sins. They certainly are. But there are some very easy temptations to fall into. Think of the first, your mouth getting you into trouble, being quick to speak, to react, to say things that get you entangled in difficult, sticky situations. Laziness, the idea of unprofitable friendships, falling in with the wrong crowd. And I know as a young person myself growing up, I don't mean I'm a young person now. No, I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying when I was growing up, I used to be a young person. It's hard for you to imagine, of course. I used to have hair, all of these kind of things. But as a young person, I can remember always hearing all the time about falling in with the wrong crowd and that sort of thing. But there is a particular temptation there. There is a very strong force about a crowd seeming to go one way, and it's very difficult to be at odds with the crowd, to stand out, to go another way. It's a very difficult thing, and oftentimes young people especially get challenged on this regularly, and it can be very tempting to just fall in. We warned about those unprofitable friendships. And then we look right at the end, these descriptions of this wicked man, and we think about pride and lying and sowing discord. Now, sowing discord, well, that sounds very old-fashioned, doesn't it? But it's actually always relevant. Always relevant. Started back in the garden, and it will continue until Jesus comes again and does away with all these things. It's always relevant. Today, we might refer to someone as creating drama. People that are gossiping and slandering and just always stirring up trouble. Oh, do you know what she said? Do you know what he said? Oh, do you know what this person said about you? And what and on, just always trying to stir up that trouble. And of course, the wisdom of Solomon would say, don't go along with that. Don't fall into that. It's very tempting. You know, we like to get the latest gossip and news and be informed and all of that sort of thing. But really, it's just what Solomon is condemning here in the way of wisdom, telling us to avoid. All right, I better stop this. So I made it all through all these verses. Any questions about anything we looked at here tonight? Okay, well, if not, I'll pray and we'll be dismissed from our Bible study. Almighty Father in heaven, Lord, thank you so much for your word and just how amazing that the timeless wisdom of your word is. And Father, help us to be able to read and understand and not get hung up on maybe odd phrases or old-fashioned sounding language, and realize that your word is always relevant, whether we're young or old or somewhere in between. Father, I just pray that you would help us to learn and to grow. Thank you so much once again for the young people that you've given us here at the church. And I just pray for them, Father, that you would be with them daily. Pray that you would protect and help and guide them. Father, I pray that you would help them to live out lives and have the desire to live honorably for you and not think about just putting these things off. Father, I pray that you would just be at work in their hearts and lives and draw them to yourself and help us, Father, not only to live this wisdom, but also to live as good examples and to be encouragers to those coming up after us as well. Father, we thank you for this time and pray that you would be with us as we go to our homes and prepare hearts and minds for services next Lord's Day. Pray all these things in the holy and precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen.